Well, hello, friends, and welcome back to the Bible for Dummies here at Chapel by the Sea on Fort Myers Beach. I'm Dr. Jim Berger. I'm the interim pastor. It's my pleasure to welcome you as we continue looking at the story of our faith. We're looking at the storyline of the Bible because remember, the Bible is not written in chronological order like it was like a history text. It's written in blocks of different kinds of material: history, poetry, prophecy, wisdom literature. And it's written with the Old Testament story, the Jewish scriptures, and the New Testament story, the story of Jesus and the church. So it's not what it's not like going to school and opening your history book and it starts with the American Revolution and it goes up through the spacewalk and the pandemic of 2020 and 2021. No, it's quite different from that. But it is the story of our spiritual DNA. This is the story of the roots of our faith. So today, as we continue on, we're going to look at the New Testament. And the New Testament, we begin with the birth of Jesus about 4 BC, and is going to go through the end of the first century. It ends with St. John's imprisonment on the island of Patmos in the persecution under Emperor Trajan. Along the way, we're going to look at Jesus, we're going to look at the church, and we're going to see how the church is extended, as Jesus promised, to the uttermost parts or to the ends of the earth. So this week we're looking at the life of Jesus. We're looking at the Gospels and the rest of the story of the New Testament. So the basic outline of the New Testament is, first you get the life of Jesus. That's the 4 Gospels. Then you're going to get the church in Jerusalem, and finally the church to all of the empire, all the Roman Empire, all the known world. That's the history, and then after that will come some letters and an apocalypse. So we begin with 4 BC to 29 AD, roughly more or less, the life of Jesus. Then we get the life of the church. So from 29 to 60 AD, we read about the spread of Christianity throughout the Roman Empire. And by the end of the book of Acts, the church has gone all the way to Rome, to the center of the world at that time. Following that, we get 60 through 100 AD. You're getting the consolidation of history and the traditions. But the thing to remember, this is the other pivotal point. Number one is Jesus' birth and death. The other pivotal point in this story is the fall of Jerusalem in 70 AD. This becomes essential in how we date our documents. If documents say, if letters and the stories say, talk as if Jerusalem is still in existence, if the temple still stands, you know it's written prior to 70 AD. If it doesn't mention the temple or Jerusalem, you know it's written after 70 AD, because when the Romans got done with it, there was nothing left. They totally destroyed the city and leveled the temple. So in the New Testament, there are 27 books written by 9 different authors. Of course, we got Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John writing the 4 Gospels, and Luke will also write the Acts of the Apostles. But then you've got Paul, St. Paul, James, Peter, Jude, and an unknown author. That's the author of the book of Hebrews. All of them are Jews except for Luke. He is the Greek in the crowd. And most of these people were Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, James, Peter were part of the original apostolic band, the 12. The others come in from different places, which we'll cover in a few moments. So first, we've got the 5 historical books. These tell the story in the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. That's the story of Jesus. The Acts of the Apostles is the story of the church, St. Paul's leadership, and St. Peter's leadership of the early church. There are 15 doctrinal letters, or as we call them, epistles. So you've got Romans, 1st and 2nd Corinthians, Galatians, Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, 1st and 2nd Thessalonians, then Hebrews, James, 1st and 2nd Peter, and 1st and 2nd John. Those are doctrinal letters. You've also got 6 personal letters, and they are 1st and 2nd Timothy. Paul's writing to his beloved Timothy. You've got Titus, Philemon, they're written by Paul. And then 3rd John, written by the Apostle John, and Jude, written by St. Jude. And we have the apocalypse at the end. That's the book of Revelation, the revelation of St. John the Divine. An apocalypse about how Jesus will reign into eternity and is in control of the world, regardless of what it appears. So with the Gospels, we have three that we refer to as synoptic Gospels. And that's because they tell the story from the beginning to the end. And that's Matthew, Mark, and Luke. John, his Gospel, talks more about what Jesus said, where they're telling us what happened. Now, Matthew is a Jewish disciple. He was a Jewish tax collector. He's writing to a Jewish audience. And as you read it, you will find he'll say things like, this is what the prophet talked about when he said, behold, a virgin shall conceive and bear a son. He's using Jewish techniques of literature and argumentation, what they call a Midrash. This is that which was spoken of in the past. It's written about 70 or 80 AD, or probably sooner, in Antioch. And it's written as a catechetical book. So it's like a catechism. New believers, before they were baptized, would be taught the book. They'd memorize it so they know what Jesus said, so they could reflect that in their lives. Now, in each of the four gospel writers is signified by an image. And the image of Matthew is either an angel or a man. Mark is symbolized by a lion. Mark is also a Jewish preacher. He was probably part of that band when Jesus was arrested. There's a story about one young man was just wearing a tunic, and when they were in the tussle, when Jesus was arrested, somebody grabbed it and he slipped out and ran away naked in the dark. Well, that's a bad thing to do in any culture, but it's really an affront in their culture. But the only person who would know that and talk about it would probably be the person to whom it happened. That's why we presume that that person is the John Mark who wrote this and was a companion of Paul's and Peter's. This is written, it's the first one written. It's the earliest, probably about 58 AD, probably from Rome. And Mark was Peter's companion. He was with Paul and Barnabas at the beginning, but as we'll hear about next time, there was a falling out and he ended up traveling with Peter. So he's symbolized by the lion, St. Mark. Luke is symbolized by a bull. He's the only Greek. He's a Greek physician writing to a Greek audience. So Matthew's going to slant things one way, Luke's going to slant them another to prove to the Greek audience that this is the Son of God. Matthew's proving that this is the promised Messiah. And he's a companion to Paul and Silas. And this is probably written about 61 from Judea. And it's part one of his two-part series, one being the gospel, the second being Acts of the Apostles. And he was involved in the Acts of the Apostles from the beginning to the end, or no, from the middle to the end. The fourth one is John's gospel, and John is symbolized by an eagle. This is a Jewish disciple. He's writing in a more philosophical vein, and he's writing from the town of Ephesus, which is in today's Western Turkey, all the way out on the coast. And he's writing about 85 or 90. So this is the last of the Gospels that is written. And they're being written down because they want to keep Jesus's words alive. You see what's going on? They're getting older. The eyewitnesses who knew Jesus, who heard him with their own ears, they're dying off. And so and Jesus has not returned yet. So the stories are recorded so that they are not lost. And Luke, as he begins the book of Acts, writes, in the first book, Theophilus, I wrote about all that Jesus did and taught from the beginning until the day when he was taken up to heaven, till his ascension, after the resurrection. So we have it from Luke's own hand that he penned both these documents. Each gospel has a different perspective. Matthew and Luke, because the particular audience they're writing to, start the story from his birth to his death. Mark and John take a different perspective, and they tell the story from his baptism to his death. Now, there's a process called textual analysis, where you look at what what passages are included with this book. Think about cut and paste on your computer. You take some from that document and you paste it in here. Take some from that document and you paste it in there, and then you write the rest. Here's what's going on. Mark is the earliest gospel written, as I said. Now, next come Matthew and Luke. All Mark's content appears in Matthew and in Luke. They never contradict each other. But there's other material that shows up, and it shows up in Matthew and Luke, but not in Mark. So we know that there was another document that's given the name, the term Q, the Q source. Don't ask me why. It's a scholarly a bit of esoteric knowledge we don't need. But we know that there was two documents floating around early, Mark and the Q source. Matthew and Luke both use them and compose their work. So think about cut and paste. Each one cuts and pastes. Each one cuts and pastes from the others, and then they fill in the rest with what they have experienced and what they've learned and what they know. Okay, so we know that Jesus is born about 4 BC in Bethlehem. Herod the Great is still on the throne. So that's one of our markers. And I told in the Christmas story about how we've figured out it was probably Jesus was probably born out 2 or 3 BC, not 4. But anyway, it doesn't matter that much. But there's been a census ordered by Caesar Augustus, and the condition is everybody has to go back to their place, their family's place of origin. So at this time in Jesus's day, Herod's kingdom. All right, this is Herod's kingdom. When he dies, just before the turn of the century, it'll be divided among his sons, those who are still alive. He killed most of his sons. He had them assassinated. Talk about family dynamics. We won't get into Herod's family at this time. But at the time of Jesus, Herod Antipas, his son, is in control of Galilee, Perea, and Judea. Philip, the tetrarch, is in charge of Decapolis. Now, during his lifetime, Jesus is born in Bethlehem, goes down to Egypt, comes back, grows up in Nazareth, and will make several trips to Jerusalem during his lifetime. So the birth story begins with a virgin shall conceive, and he's going to be born in Bethlehem, even though they're from Nazareth. This is a long way by foot. And what compels them to go is this census that Caesar Augustus has ordered so that he can figure out the enrollment, how many people there are. We use it for, representation and that sort of thing, but he wants it so he can figure out how many people he can tax. But he's going to Bethlehem because he is of the house and lineage of King David. And that's the traditional home of David. So Nazareth to Jerusalem to Bethlehem. That's our storyline. When they're 12, his family has made the pilgrimage to Jerusalem for one of the high festivals, for Passover. And Succoth, Passover, and Pentecost. Jews within 35 miles of Jerusalem were required to come to the city, to come to the temple. And the dream of all Jews was to celebrate Passover in Jerusalem, next year in Jerusalem. It's still said today. At 12 years old, the family journeys down there. And remember, they're going to journey with an extended clan, extended family from Nazareth and from the surrounding area. So it's a big, big celebration, big pilgrimage down. And everybody's having fun together. They finish, they're on their way back, and they get one day back north, and where's Jesus? No, he wasn't traveling. He wasn't with us today. So they panic. They go back to the city. And on the third day, they finally find him in the temple. And I'm going to show you why it was so hard to find him in the temple in a few minutes. And when they ask him, why'd you do this to us? He says, but I had to be about my father's business. Whoa. But he's astounded the priests and the scholars with his knowledge and his insight. So from his early age, this kid has got potential. He's very, very prescient, very, very wise. When he's 27 years old, he begins his ministry by being baptized in the Jordan. John the Baptist does the deed, and he is Jesus's cousin. And in all likelihood, Caiaphas, who will be the high priest at the time of Jesus's execution, is probably also a distant relative of this extended family. It's not for certain, but there's a strong possibility that that was the case. After the baptism, he's led into the wilderness to be tempted. And for 40 days, he's fasting in the wilderness. And at the end of 40 days, he's hungry. And Satan comes to him and tempts him. And he says, why don't you just turn these stones into bread? And Jesus responds, we do not live by bread alone. Well, says Satan, let's go up to the pinnacle of the temple. Look down. Now, throw yourself down, because the scripture says the Lord will give his angels charge over you so you don't even smash your foot against the stone. Jesus replies, Satan, you shall not put the Lord your God to the test. So he takes him up to a high mountain. He shows him all the kingdoms of the world. And his all this I will give to you if you just fall down and worship me. And Jesus replies, get thee behind me, Satan, or away with you, Satan. Worship the Lord your God and serve only him. Then Satan left him for a while, and angels came and ministered to him. So now he begins his ministry. And the preaching ministry of Jesus is mostly up here in Galilee. He goes as far north as Caesarea Philippi and makes 2 trips down to Jerusalem, during the second of which he will be crucified. This is all over a 3-year period. His whole ministry is just 3 years. Now, Herod Antipas rules Galilee and Judea. And, well, that's just who's on the throne. Now, Jesus has a band of disciples, followers. And first of all, you've got the 4 fishermen, Peter and his brother Andrew, James and his brother John. And Peter, James, and John are the kind of the inner 3 that he hangs around with. You've got a tax collector, a Jew who worked for the Romans, robbing people, and he's repented, become a new person, and he's also known as Levi, and he's traveling with them. So he's the guy that was cooperating with the hated Romans. But you've also got in the crowd, among that 12, at least 1, maybe 2 zealots or revolutionaries. You've got Simon, who's known as Simon the Zealot, and Judas Iscariot. That could mean he is a zealot also. So there must have been some real fun conversations around the campfire between the Roman tax collector, the guy who tax collector for the Romans, and these zealots who want to kill all the Romans. Jesus had to do a lot of mediation, I suspect. Then you got the rest of the crew. You've got Philip, you have Bartholomew, also known as Nathaniel, Thomas, the twin, James, the son of Alphaeus, or James, the other James, and Thaddeus, or Judas, the other Judas, and Judas Iscariot, the traitor. So that's the 12 who travel with him. They're the inner circle. But there's about 120 or 144, I forget which it is offhand, who are also the larger band that is allied with him and travel with him and move about. So he doesn't just travel with a few people. When Jesus starts moving from one city to another, there's a crowd that accompanies him. His ministry focuses around miracles, messages, and parables. So there are various miracles he does, restoring sight to a blind man, restoring hearing to a deaf man, raising someone from the dead, healing leprosy, casting out demons, and curing all diseases. His messages are memorable, and like the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5, 6, and 7 is a good example of that. He's teaching the people so that they get the message of what God is expecting of them and what the kingdom of God means for them and for their lives. And he's teaching in parables because these are stories. These are easy for people to remember. And so the 3 parts of the ministry all weave together in a whole, in a tapestry, and that's what we get as the ministry. So when baptismal candidates studied the book of Matthew, they were studying the miracles, the messages, and the parables, and weaving it all together in their minds so they could understand and remember what Jesus' message was about the kingdom of God and their role in it. It says the same thing to us today. So the story, at the end of all the messages, miracles, and parables, we get the story of the Passion. This is the story of the last week of Jesus' life. And it takes up a disproportionate portion of all four Gospels. And it begins with Palm Sunday when he enters into Jerusalem. And the people welcome him. They throw their garments on the road before him. They cut branches, palm branches, and wave them. And he enters the city and goes to the temple. And he's appalled when he goes in the temple because it's filled with money changers and merchants. And he is enraged and he throws them out. He causes a big disruption. He says, my house should be called a house of prayer, but you have made it a den of thieves and robbers. And he drives them out. And now we're going to see in a minute. Well, here you go. Let's show you. This is a drawing of the temple. This is the inner court where only the Jews are allowed to enter this part. Everything else can be visited by the Gentiles. But it was filled with those money changers and merchants. So that's the big area that Jesus clears out. It wasn't just a room. It was a big multi-acre area of the temple that he strips. And incidentally, the high priest families owned all these concessions. So when he threw the money changers out, he attacked the high priest and his revenue. So Thursday, he's teaching in the temple all week. And on Thursday night is the beginning of this Passover. So he has the Seder meal with his apostles. And this is what we know as the Last Supper. And it's there that he institutes the rite that we celebrate in Holy Communion. This is my body broken for you. Do this in remembrance of me. And in like manner also when they had supped, he took the Elijah cup from the table, very symbolic one, and says, this cup is the new covenant in my blood, poured out for the remission of sins. All of you, drink of it. Makes a profound impact on these apostles. And afterwards, after they sung a hymn, they go out to the Garden of Gethsemane. And you got to remember, these guys have been all evening eating, singing, drinking wine. And when they get out there, they fall asleep. But Jesus is up praying. 3 times he goes back to pray again. And then Judas shows up with the temple guards, betrays him with a kiss. And the guards arrest Jesus and drag him off. They take him to the house of the high priest, not to a prison, not to a jail, but to the high priest's house. The high priest, they actually go to the father-in-law of the high priest, Annas, whose son-in-law is Caiaphas, and there they have they put him on trial. So in Jerusalem, this would be the temple. This down here is Pilate's palace. The high priest's house is over in this region, and Herod's palace is someplace over in this region. I've forgotten the exact location now. Oh, there it is. So it's all within a relatively small area. But this temple is nearly double the size that Solomon's was. So it's a massive 30 or nearly 40 acres it covers. So that's a big chunk of land. And this is Solomon's porch where Jesus was teaching, or no, there it is. Solomon's portico over here. That's where Jesus was teaching all week. And this thing is the Antonia Fortress. There's a Roman garrison up there because this place is so volatile, so explosive politically, that they have a Roman garrison stationed there to make sure that if there's any trouble down here in the temple, they can get down there in a flash and put an end to it. Next time when we talk about St. Paul, you'll see that that's going to play a critical role in Paul's story too. So this is where it's taking place on this Thursday night. Jesus is taken into the high priest's house and he's examined by the priests. This is a kangaroo trial. According to Jewish law, this is not allowed to happen. Trials have to be conducted in daylight. There are specific rules of evidence, procedures to be followed. They're all tossed out the window. They just want to get rid of this guy. They're afraid of him. He has told Peter, and he's told all the disciples that, behold, tonight the shepherd will be struck and all the sheep will flee. And Peter said, I'll never leave you. Even if I have to die, I'm not going to desert you. And he said, Peter, before the cock crows twice, you will deny that you know me 3 times. So while Jesus is standing in the house, it's an open format. It's not solid stone walls. there's a lot of air moving through, and you can see in from the outside. And Peter's out in the courtyard with John, keeping warm by a fire. And a servant girl comes up and says, "Surely you're one of them. I saw you with him." And he says, "No, I'm not. I don't know the guy." And somebody else says it, somebody else. And finally he says with a curse, "I don't know. I swear, I don't know the guy." And the rooster crows. And we're told that Jesus looked out, saw him, caught Peter's eye, and Peter is devastated. He goes out and weeps, feels that he's been a total flop as a disciple. They convict him. They decide he's guilty. But here's the problem. Pilate hates the Jewish leaders, but the Jewish leaders have no power for capital punishment. They cannot execute Jesus. Only Pilate can do that. So they take him to him, and Pilate examines him. There's this back and forth duel of words, but he finds nothing wrong. So now Pilate's got this dilemma. What do I do with him? He's a Galilean. You're Herod's problem. So he sends him over to Herod's palace, which I showed you on the map. And Herod's delighted to meet this guy. He wants to see if this is Herod Antipas, not Herod the Great. Herod the Great's dead. So he wants to see if Jesus can do a miracle for him. And Jesus refuses. And so he's very disappointed and ticked off. So he has the guards humiliate him, and then he sends him back to Pilate. It's your problem again, Pilate. You deal with it. So the Jews threaten to make trouble with Caesar if Pilate doesn't act. He tries for a compromise. He has Jesus flogged. And by the way, the guideline for flogging in the Roman law was you were to beat the person with these metal-tipped, multi-strapped flails until the flesh hung in tatters from their back. Yuck. And he says to the people, "Are you satisfied?" They said, "No, crucify him." And he brings him out and he says, "Here's the man, ecce homo in Latin." So he makes some deals. All right, I get to release one prisoner. You want me to release Barabbas, the zealot who's killed people, or should I release Jesus? And the people ask for Barabbas. And he says, "What do you want me to do with your king?" And they say, "Oh, we have no king but Caesar." And so he condemns him to death, and Barabbas is set free, and Jesus is led out to be crucified. And Pilate has water brought out, and he washes his hands, and he says, "His blood, my hands are clean now. His blood be on you and your children." So after Jesus is worked over again, they put the cross on his shoulder, force him to carry it, and as he's going out, he collapses under the weight and from the loss of blood. And when they get to the Golgotha, the place of the skull outside the city gates, they crucify him. Now, with crucifixion, there were various ways that it was done. Strapping the person on, nailing through the wrists, nailing through the hands, nailing through the feet or through the ankles. We know that we have archaeological evidence, actual skeletons, where the nails were still present in the bone. And they would place a small seat under the buttocks. And the reason for that was it extended the length of time it took to die. Because when the person is hanging there, the weight of your body pulls down against those nails, and you go forward, your shoulders dislocate, and you suffocate slowly. So to get your breath, you have to pull against those nails and push against ones with your feet in order to get up high enough to get a breath, and then you sag back down again. It is the most horrible means of torturous death ever invented. Jesus is crucified between two thieves. His mother, Mary, and his aunts are there, along with John, the beloved disciple. And this place is so cosmopolitan that Pilate has a sign written in 3 languages saying, "Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews." It's written in Aramaic, it's written in Latin, and it's written in Greek. To make sure everybody can see it, everybody can read it. He hangs there for 3 hours. And by the end, he's been worked over pretty badly. So he's about gone. They offer him some wine on a sponge, and he refuses it. And he says, "Into your hands I commend my spirit." Says, "It is finished," and he dies. So he was crucified about noon. He dies about 3 o'clock. Now the bodies have to be taken down from the cross because this is Friday. The Sabbath begins at sundown. So a couple hours before, They want to make sure these prisoners die. Remember what I said, they have to push up with their feet to breathe. So they go around and they break the legs of the guys on the cross, so they can't push up, so they die more quickly. Jesus has already died, so there's no bone broken in his body. But just to be sure, the soldier thrusts a spear into his side and pierces the pericardium of his heart. Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus, two members of the Sanhedrin, the Jewish council, go into Pilate and ask for the body and claim it. And they bury it in a nearby tomb. And they bring spices, they wrap it appropriately, have to move fast, but they get it done. A stone is rolled in front of the door to close it. And Pilate sends a guard over, and they put a wax seal on there to show the governor has sealed this. You open this on peril of death. And so the guard's waiting. Now they know the word is out that he has said on the third day he was going to rise from the dead. So that's why the guard is there, to make sure nobody tries to steal the body and then claim that he actually rose from the dead. So when is the third day? He goes in on Friday. After 3 days, he will rise again. Shouldn't that be Friday, Saturday, Sunday? Shouldn't that be Monday? Well, what you have to understand is any portion of a day counts as a day. When I was in the Bahamas as a minister, if somebody came into the country and wanted to get married, they had to wait 3 days to get their license. But any portion of a day counted as a day. So if you arrived at 11 o'clock on Wednesday night, there was Thursday, 8 o'clock Friday morning, the third day, you could legally purchase your license. That's the same kind of thinking we've got here. Friday's day one, Saturday's the second day, Sunday morning is the third day, and the resurrection. Jesus rises from the dead, and the Jews call it the first day of the week. The Romans called it Sunday. Christians refer to it as the Lord's Day. But we mark it as the day that Jesus triumphed over the power of death and cast it aside and came out alive and lives forevermore. Now, the disciples, they're being told, go back to the city and wait. And after a few days, he starts appearing. And over the next 40 days, he appears to them on multiple occasions, beginning the night he rose from the dead, that Sunday night. And afterwards, he's going to rise into heaven in the ascension. And after the 40 days, they wait, and we'll pick up the story there next week. We have the apostles waiting in the upper room, as they were told to do. And they don't know for how long. They don't know for what they are waiting. But nonetheless, they come, they gather, they pray, they sing, they worship, and they wait. And that's where we pick up the story next. Next, we're going to get to the story of the church. The church is sent to the uttermost part of the earth. So for next time, you can read the book of Acts. It's not that long, really. And the Bible for Dummies, chapters 20 through 23. And that's where we're going to pick up the story next week as we wrap things up with the Bible for Dummies, a brief overview of the story of God and his world. So I'm Dr. Jim Berger. Thank you for joining me. And I look forward to being with you again next time as we look at the story of the early church and our ancestors in the faith. God bless you. Have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time.